Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Ontiveros, and my group members are John Robles, Daisy Rivera, Isaac Ortiz, and this is our research project. We will discuss how African Americans and Hispanics have gone through racism in and out of schools for years and how it has affected them. Racism affects students and often leaves them discouraged and humiliated. We need to put an end to racism in schools.
From History.com, it stated that a group of high school known as the Little Rock Nine enrolled in Central High School in 1957, in which the students were initially prevented from entering the racially segregated school by Overall Faubus, the governor of Arkansas. From Albany Education, Chicano movement was one of the least studied social movements of 1960s. Encompassed a broad cross-section of issues from restoration of land grants to farm workers' rights, to a chance education to voting and political rights.
With that in mind, our group has come to ask one question. How have high school students dealt with racism throughout American history? African Americans and Hispanics still continue to receive racism today. From the article of Education Week, Hate in Schools, an in-depth look, it states, found inside the backpack of a Latina student a note that said, "Go back to Mexico." Two other hate-filled incidents invoking Donald Trump's name and using swastikas were also reported that same day. Is what was happening in the high school of Council Rock High in the primarily white suburbs of Philadelphia the day after the election of President Trump.
2016 messages were spray painted in black, gold, and silver on trash cans and doors across the campus. 75% of the students here at Kali Kalmeka Language Academy are Latino.
My mom said, she says, I saw it, I was upset by it, and I walked in the bathroom and just started to cry. And it's something that strikes deep at an emotion. When you do something or say something that threatens a child's feeling of safety, that is not it.
Have you ever seen students or anybody like went down because of racism or yeah?
I think we've seen throughout history there's been a lot of examples of racism, starting with slavery. That was the biggest form of racism I've come to know up to date, but I know there's been lasting effects from slavery. Nowadays it's it's less frequent that racism happens or whatnot, but it's still out there, and definitely something that needs a lot of attention because it does affect people.
Have you have you ever seen a friend experience racism
Mm,
or family members?
I think that I haven't personally witnessed it, but I know that it's happened. Somebody, because they're a person of color, whether it's someone who's Mexican, someone who's black, they are less likely to get hired at a job setting than somebody who may be of a Caucasian white background.
Okay. Did you ever see segregation? If so, did you agree or disagree with it? Why or why not?
You know what? Not necessarily purposefully have I seen segregation. However, in my classroom, just last week, I had an activity where students were supposed to be speaking to each other, and I did see two groups of students form as they were completing the activity. It was, a Mexican group of students on one side, doing the activity with themselves, and then another group of students of, um, black students, in another group. So I think even segregation happens even like within students, and you know what I mean.
Many African Americans' worth is determined by the color of their skin. To racist eyes, the darker the skin, the less valued you are as a person. In The Guardian, the article Growing Up Black in America, Here's My Story of Everyday Racism, the author states, I grew up around a lot of white people. In elementary school, I remember being told that I was one of the good ones, not like the bad ones. I was meant to understand I was different. I am good by American standards, or at least better. My skin is light. Most of the time, I dress like a middle-class professional. He tells his story of how just because his skin was lighter, he had a better image than other African Americans with darker skin.
The DAL test was integral to the Brown v. Board of Education because it clearly demonstrated that separate was not equal and separate was not good. In fact, separate was an injustice. What we're looking at here are the dolls that Drs. Kenneth and Mamie Clark used in their doll studies. The doll tests were a series of studies that Mamie Clark and Kenneth Clark did to try to determine racial awareness in young children, with the implication being that in a segregated society, if children are aware of race and the differences in race and the differences in how different racial groups are treated, that it would impact how they felt very well themselves. Part of the Brown case was they showed young children black and white dolls, and they would ask the children, show me the doll that's nice, give me the doll that's the best, give me the doll that looks like you. And more often than not, the black children showed the doll as the nice doll was the white doll.
This is Miss Blue, 8th grade language arts teacher at Mountain View Middle School. I was born in 1956. We moved to the Antelope Valley when I was in 9th grade. And the whole first 2 weeks, not that I experienced this, but for the first whole 2 weeks, we had instruction repeatedly on what to do if there was a race riot. And so it was kind of freaky because I just moved there, just entered high school, and each day, this is what you do if this is happening. This is what you do if this is happening. And I was like, what kind of school did my parents move me to? And what had happened was they were trying to integrate the area. So the year I attended there, I saw no problems. But they had set in stone a whole process. But that was my total coming up against racism and how it played out in the 1960s. All right, so it's how did you see the world change? So the world has changed. Integration is totally done. When I started here in the 1990s, if you would come on Mountain View's campus, you were going to see the Hispanic students, the actual gangbangers, the ones who were connected to gangs. They were here and alive and well here at Mountain View in the late 1990s and early 2000s. But not this corner, but that corner, that's where they all sat in their big, wide, baggy pants and the whole 9 yards. And they were gang affiliated. Somewhere over, that corner or that corner would be all the African American students. In the classroom, they'd be totally integrated. Go out to lunch, they would self-segregate. We had several incidences in probably 1999, 2000, where the police car actually had to come out into the quad here to separate the two groups. Things would be written in the bathroom about one group or the other, and then there'd be a fight at lunch almost every day. I was asked my first year here, Mrs. Blue, Mr. Blood taught here at that point. And I get asked, how are we teaching at the same school? And they had to explain it to me because I'm Mrs. Blue, and so I'm technically a Crip. Don't you know we call you Mrs. Crip behind your back?
Is your hair political? In South Africa, yes. Here, black African students at one of the country's most prestigious schools have been in protest against their school's hair policy. They allege that teachers put pressure on black students to chemically straighten their hair, more in line with a European appearance, and limited the girls from speaking in local African languages.
In order to stop racism in schools, we simply need to accept each other for our different cultures and leave school to be a place where students should not have to feel discriminated against. But of course, others would disagree with us and say racist things towards minorities and claim that because of your different culture or skin color, you are less than them. People say that racism is dead in schools, but that is a false claim. In the end, it's cruel and we're all equal, and that is a very simple yet complicated answer to it.
In conclusion, we have to come learn that racism is a very cruel thing and that it still happens to this day. We can't always prevent racism outside the school because people have different views and opinions, but it shouldn't be happening in schools. Students should come to school not worried that they will be judged by the color of their skin, but who they are as a person.